You'll find there's one text that, describes Noah as a giant.
This is absolutely perfect because I just reacted to a video about did the Nephilim survive after the flood? And now I'm going to be reacting to Michael Heiser explain, did the Nephilim survive after the flood? What are these other accounts of the Nephilim, or are they something else? So I'm super excited to dive into this with you guys. I absolutely love it. Let's get into it.
Rephaim after the flood. Let's just broaden it. Giants after the flood. Was there a second wave of this? In terms of the biblical text, we're never told anything like that. As far as another period or event of cohabitation. That's one of the three options for why they're there. And in Unseen Realm, I sketch out the three explanations for how you get giant clans after the flood. And in short terms, one is you view either Noah or Noah's sons or the daughters married to those sons as somehow being a carrier, for lack of a better word.
That's what I said.
And for some ancient Jews, that was their answer, because you will find texts that say that. You'll find there's one text that describes Noah as a giant. Again, it tells you that when you find a text like that, it tells you they're thinking about the question, and so they feel like they've got to come up with some answer to it. So Noah was like fathered by one of them. Those who shall not be named. That. You'll find another text where Noah's parents are having an argument. His dad Lamech. This is the Genesis Apocryphon. It's a very famous text. Lamech goes to his wife, who's actually given a name in the text, Bitanosh or Batanosh. Both of them mean daughter of man. But he comes to her and says, well, I heard about all this Watcher stuff going on. And I just want to make sure that this kid's mine.
Yeah, what a drama. That's insane. I love that he's bringing this up because it's exactly what the other conversation we just had with the other video that I just posted at 12 p.m. This one will be at 2. So I love it.
And they have an argument. She's like, don't you remember the other night when, so again, it tells you that they're thinking about the question. So that's one option. Another option is you view the flood not as a truly global event, but a regional event, regional or localized event. And you can have that view and still say to the biblical writer, this was all the earth because all the nations of the earth are listed in Genesis 10. To us, that's regional, but to them it was comprehensive. Whatever. But you have to somehow then have ancestors, Nephilim ancestors, survive the flood in some region of the known world. And people who take that view will usually go to the Aegean Sea, because of the Philistines. The Philistines are actually members, we know this from Egyptian texts. The Philistines are a group of people from a larger group of people called the Sea Peoples, who were seafaring peoples from the Aegean. They come to the mainland of not only Egypt but Canaan on boats. That's how they get there.
What?
If you've read the Portent, I did not
know that. I did not know the Philistines were sea people. I thought they were known as like the wanderers, the people who had no really place to live. And in the Egyptian text, and in their drawings in the Egyptian text or on the walls or whatever you want to call it, they were drawn as being very tall compared to the Egyptians, and that's not normal. Usually, the Egyptians draw themselves as being a lot taller than any other people group, but instead, the Egyptians were about the same height as these people who they think were the Philistines, and these Philistines were on like their knees or like almost sitting down, and they were just as tall as the Egyptians.
To some of this stuff, to strike a fictional trajectory about Goliath, but since Goliath was the son of Rapha, which you can say, well, that means he's a Rephaim, and he's a Philistine, and they're one of the sea peoples, that maybe something survived here. Jeremiah talks about the Philistines coming from Caphtor, which is one of the Aegean, islands and stuff like that. And again, people know where the Philistines came from. The third option is to take Genesis 6:1, Genesis 6:4, and translate it a little bit differently. And this is legitimate. This is possible. If you go to Genesis 6:4, we'll try not to have a grammar spasm here. But it says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children to them. Now, when there, you can take that particle, and because of the verb form that follows it, okay, being an imperfect verb form, you can translate it this way. The Nephilim were on earth in those days and also afterward, whenever the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, they bore children to them. You'll actually see this verse referenced in Hebrew reference grammars about this particular use of the imperfect with this particle. So that's possible. Now, should we do that? Is that what it really means to say? Well, who knows, because it's a translation choice. And that's all you got. You know, you just sort of pick one of those three, you know, answers to the question, you know, why we get them on the other side of the flood. And that's, you know, targeting these Rephaim, because you get Rephaim in Deuteronomy 2 and 3. It's very clear. They're described as being very tall. They're referred to as Anakim. The Anakim, according to Numbers 13, come, quote, from the Nephilim. I mean, it's point blank, you know, what's there. So those are the paths you have to follow, you know, to answer that question. Go ahead.
If it is the third option, do you think that would have been a second incursion by different watchers, or would that have been the first group that somehow escaped out of the abyss?
Yeah, I don't think there's any indication that the original offenders get anywhere except where they're always described as being in prison. So you would have to have the same sort of transgression of heaven and earth is what it comes down to.
If it would have to happen, then this is what L.A. Marzulli likes to think, is there's a second incursion. They're still trying to produce an offspring, a counter being twisted and perverted that is something not like God. That's crazy.
And there's no indication of that specifically. I mean, you could look at what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11 about because of the angels, and you could say, well, Paul apparently thought this was a possibility. Okay, you could say that, but Paul's not making a statement that it did. It's just he's like, we just don't ever want to see this happen again. You know, it's that kind of thing. So you could take that and say, well, for Paul, maybe it was a possibility, but it's not a real answer to the question. When do I think Genesis 1 to 11 was written? Because of the heavy Mesopotamian influence there in those 11 chapters. And could Moses have had that information? That's a short way of saying it. Well, I would never want to say that Moses couldn't have had the information. Moses is an Egyptian. He's raised in the court of Pharaoh, Akkadian during the New Kingdom, which would be the Mosaic era by either chronology, either later or older chronology. Akkadian in that period, which was the literary language of Babylonian stuff, Mesopotamian stuff, was kind of like English is today. It was the lingua franca. It was the language of international correspondence. And we know that for sure because of the Tel El Amarna letters. Okay, these are letters, it's a correspondence. I'm sure you've heard of the El Amarna letters. They're actually a correspondence between the Pharaoh of Egypt and his underlings in Canaan, the people he's put in charge. And they're written in Akkadian. They're not written in Egyptian. So we know that for sure. So if Moses, again, was being groomed to be a pharaoh or a diplomat or some other high office in the household of Pharaoh, I think it's reasonable to assume he probably had to learn Akkadian. I think that's a reasonable assumption. Again, it's still an argument from silence because we don't actually know what he read.
Right.
The question then becomes, okay, if he could read it, what is he reading? There's no evidence in Egypt that you have libraries from Mesopotamia in Egypt. You have lots of correspondence. You got lots of letters and documents and land deeds. And wouldn't that have been awful, to spend your youth, deciphering economic texts, like somebody's billed to somebody for 10 sheep, if treaties, I guess, would be better, you got to
That could
learn
be
that
though.
stuff. But so we don't really know, again, what he would have, been reading. On the other side, there's so much that is overtly polemic in Genesis 1-11 against Mesopotamian material that it's really next to impossible. And in fact, it would just violate what you actually see in the text to say that whoever wrote Genesis 1-11, or at least this part of Genesis 1-11, was not looking at a Mesopotamian text specifically to respond to things in that text. Because it's more than like deity names and stuff like that. It's even grammar in some places, where they want the literate person to know what they are tracking on and what they're objecting to, how they are subverting the Mesopotamian material that they assume the reader knows. It gets very detailed. So there are places you just have to have that in front of you, unless I guess you memorized cuneiform or something. I mean, again, that's possible. There were people who did that. So it's a back and forth, for me. I think the more reasonable explanation is that Genesis 1-11 or what was either composed or edited during the exile with this strategy in mind. But I won't say that it's impossible that Moses, could have known that and had access to the material. We don't see a path, but that doesn't mean there wasn't one. So you can actually Rephaim after the flood, or just release this.
I loved it. That was very interesting. I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments below. Did the Nephilim survive? Did they get killed off? Comment down below. And if you didn't watch the other video that I posted at 12 o'clock, go check it out. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. And always remember, guys, Jesus loves you. I'm trying to hit to 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I know we can do it with your help, so thank you so much for all the love and support. It means the world.